All right, we're going to give a try here for the think tank. Thank you, team, the think tank, for your interesting Stump the Professor questions. I like that they're very short and concise, and my answers, unfortunately, are not going to be short and concise. That's the kind of the way I roll. So get ready and hopefully interesting information. Again, always reminding at the beginning of a video that I am responding to your questions. I don't really feel like I have the complete answer on my own. So always verify and ask around and get different opinions. And that's, I just want to be part of the conversation. And I just appreciate how you all show up and form these questions. So, question number one to get started is it ever okay to intentionally change a team into a chaotic space? Uh, yes and no. So actually, this is done all the time. I don't think it's that the question is not far off. I do think that people are intentionally pushed into chaotic spaces in training simulation ways to figure out how people will respond. I mean, there's lots of information to get people more into a response mode, to instigate adrenaline in ways that sometimes can spark creative solutions. This is something that happens a lot. I would even say you're in school and you're in this week, which is where I think the most chaotic part of the term is in this. And in fact, we have a word for it. We call it Dead Week. Dead Week is traditionally called Dead Week because of the feeling of chaos and overwhelming, and it's an emotional time to try and push through assignments and tasks and manage life and work and get through all of this. And so I think actually the way school is designed is to see, can you deal with chaos? And you've probably been in training programs. Jordan is in the military. If anyone ever and knows anyone or had any experience with that, you know that there are certain ways that training is done to push people into chaotic spaces. Uh, so the difference as a qualifier, is it ever okay to intentionally change a team and move them into a chaotic space is really the word intention. And to, if you have a team and you want to do something where you want to use the elements of chaos, it's good to meta communicate that, to create a moment of, we are going to do a specific training. I cannot tell you what's going to happen and stuff, but it's going to go from this point to this point, and we are going to spend this day in this realm of the unknown and uncertainty, and allow for people to enter in the space with the intention of chaos. I may not use the word chaos because that can often spark the wrong thing you're really trying to go to. Actually, in the book Creativity Inc. By Ed Catmull and Amy Wallace, I think, Creativity Inc., which is the story of Pixar, he talks about a, a day that's set aside by the company where you do not have to do anything that you're told to do. I don't know if it's a day or a week. I can't. It's been a minute since I read the book, but I thought this kind of attaches to this, that you're going to come into work. There's no meetings. There's no deadlines that day. Nothing is supposed to be due. You are given a full day to work on whatever you want to work on, and it's up to you. And and that is really to purposefully push the whole company into a non-linear sense making period of time. It has a beginning and it has an end, and the rules of it are that you get to work on whatever you want to work on. And animators and engineers and story people all of a sudden can put aside whatever it is the task they're on. And if they have an idea, oh, I've always wanted to try this, or I've always wanted to do this, they can explore a more creative space based on what they want to do. And that opens up all these like innovations and ideas that people usually wouldn't, or they could go work with someone else in a completely different team or department, and that they usually would never collaborate with for ideas. And I think that is a type of chaotic space, especially organizations want all this predictability and novelty, predictability. And they, because of that predictability on the spectrum, the dialectical tension, they lose novelty and spontaneity because the rigidity of predictability helps an organization. They need that in a way to fully function. You can't live always in the brainstorming, innovative place and really have any sense of accomplishment. There is a rigidity that is needed, but if you don't allow for the novelty space, right? Um, and definitely people who have to train in emergency situations or military situations, they're going to be exploring this chaotic space. Another thing about this, of why you might intentionally move towards less structure, might be a better way to say it, is to find out what people's metal is. Who are people outside of predictability? How do people show up? Some people, this is a very stressful place to live in. They need the rigidity, predictability. I want to know exactly what's going to happen and when, and that's their way they survive. They might be coming out of traumatic past experiences or complex trauma, big T trauma versus little T trauma, or other situations where their need for predictability is how they manage themselves in shared spaces, public spaces, um, and maintain their own identity. And so we want to acknowledge that. Uh, and if you intentionally pull people into uncertainty or ambiguity, uh, you are finding out more about what skills people are bringing. So that person who really, really likes the predictability, I mean, we all need it. It's a vitamin everybody needs, including me. Um, uh, that but how do they meet the uncertainty can tell you more about where they belong and what skills you can rely on that person, and enter into conversations with them about where their strengths are, right? Because that's a certain strength as well. And some people can move into uncertainty and ambiguity even if it causes a stress response. They're not shutting down in that stress response. They actually kick into another level of creativity and show up in an adrenaline space. But that's not sustainable. Those hormones that you need and the adrenaline cause burnout, and causes an agitation, which we don't want to live in as well. Sometimes, okay, so that's the functional piece of why we might intentionally choose uncertainty and chaotic space. You want to create a time frame, right? All that. Okay. The disadvantage, sometimes you have a dark triad personality. What is a dark triad? A dark triad, that is someone who is living in the spaces of Machiavellian, which is a strategic way to conquer. That's how you want to think about Machiavellian personalities, that they develop strategy to win. And it's at the expense of others, usually. Narcissistic personalities, or, okay, psychopath or sociopath tendencies. Those are three different lanes, those three different things. Don't I'm not a psychologist, so we definitely want to rely on people who have more of a working understanding of the psychology of dark triad personalities. But sometimes dark triad personalities, when they get into roles of power, will purposefully want to create more hierarchy and secure their power by creating chaotic spaces, by creating unpredictability and ambiguity in the instructions in order to increase their elements of power, increase their fortitude. They would create this fortress of power through chaotic spaces. So constantly changing the instructions or moving deadlines around or not being clear about instruction, about what they need. These are dysfunctional ways that we see chaotic spaces used to serve um, discerned triad, dark triad personality types to maintain their position of power. And sometimes to cover up corruption or other things, they'll use the group, putting the group in chaos as a form of distraction to create elements of corruption. So we'll sometimes see that happening there. All right, second question from our team, the think tank. Boy, these are thinkers for sure. Way to go. Oh, when do you know when to delegate? And when do you give your team more command? So delegating can be a way of giving your team more command, but I think you're asking specifically about how do you allow the team to decide which tasks. So I think this kind of goes back to one of the questions from another team, the Creative Cool Commanders, but when you're really asking when do you trust your team? And that's a great question for this class because we are talking a lot about trust. And I think you could say, hey team, I'm going to let you decide who's going to do which task, but definitely you're all meeting on Zoom. So why don't you push that record button and send in that meeting to me, or the transcript, send me the transcript. Maybe you'll say, oh, just send me who's doing what. Give me some transparency. So transparency is a word that's often used by um, people who want their leadership to be more transparent, or fund leadership's using it saying, I want the team, not leadership, I should say management instead, because leadership can exist anywhere. But when we're asking management, when management's asking workers to be more transparent with their process, show your work, um, it really is demonstrating a lack of trust as well. Like we often think transparency might be a way to create more trust, or it can be a way to shut down trust because openness it, openness often can be if you're asking for more openness, it's often an indicator. Obviously, I don't know if it's obvious or not, or how that works. I can talk more about it as needed. But I do want to flag the play on transparency and making sure it's not shutting down trust in a group. I also want to say that if you give your team more command of the process to get to the product, you are allowing for mistakes, you're allowing for humanness. It's a type of uncertainty. I just talked about ambiguity and uncertainty. If you are the supervisor or manager in charge, high trust comes with is high risk. It's a high risk endeavor. And if you know you don't do if you don't do well with ambiguity or uncertainty, then letting go of your team to figure out process is you have to kind of check in with yourself about the ambiguity. that you of the pain of that moment of and recognizing it's a high risk choice. If you do that, you are if you're trying to reduce the risk of doing that, you've taken away you've taken away trust. You just have. Now, if a team struggles time after time when you've given them their own ability towards process, that's when you're going to want to, with that team, unwrap the process. And you're going to do that through postmortems. Where can we improve? What do you think would be a better way to approach this? Where did we reach our snags? And that means there was mistakes made. It wasn't perfect, and that's okay. That's okay. Uh, if you're working towards a high I need my results to be perfect. And this is what I talked about in another team meeting, that AI is really driving this perfection of a result. That I have the perfect poem, I have the perfect symphony, I have the perfect document or the perfect answer. Um, it may seem like it's perfect because it's showing up in this language model result, or a perfect painting or whatever. But that doesn't, but perfection is not human and perfection is not authentic. And it actually will shut down trust in your workplace. So that means we need to, if we're really going to combat how we're going to allow humanness to still have value, that means you as a supervisor need to value the mistake as a plate and uncertainty as and the process, the journey is part of the adventure of us working this out together as a team. It's also good to ask your team. Like it might be good to check in with them and ask, how much of this would you like delegated? Or do you want to, what process, how do you want to include me in this process? Or y'all got this, right? Um, it's hard because managers have to be accountable for the results and the productivity numbers. And that's sometimes hard when you're in that position. But you need to advocate for your team and advocate for being human and advocate for the mistakes and say, yeah, this time we got this right and this is where we still need work, right? The glow and the grow model of feedback, but advocate for that. Advocate that the mistake is part of the process and we needed that mistake to know where we can improve. It's complicated, but I don't think it's, or is it complex? A little of both. How do you balance, third question, how do you balance your work and personal life when you work with your spouse or partner? Such a beautiful question. When you work with a romantic partner in the same workplace, how do you balance that? So I'm going to bring in some things about relationship. And I think this is good for best friends too. I don't think it just has to be if a friendship forms because of work, that outside of work, or if outside of work you have a friend and you end up in similar workplace spaces, these friendship is so valuable. And definitely with a romantic partner, you want to value the friendship. So you need space. You need space between you. And you need space in the workplace and you need space in private life. And if you are in really intense, close working proximity to each other, when you come home, how are you allowing for each person to have space uh, and togetherness in a different way? One thing would be to have different hobbies, right? Or different expertise. Uh, things that you value about the other person. You might want to think back to what brought you together is usually the spark that someone brought something different to the relationship. And that difference is what we want to value. So if your spouse, if they're really good at fixing things or really good at woodworking or cars, and someone's really good at cooking or travel or making travel plans or things like this, like what do you value about the other person that is complementary to what you bring to the relationship? You really need to put more focus and emphasis on your differences and valuing that that person has something different. It's just like any team or workplace. A good team is going to value this differences in skills, but we want to do that in our friendships, and we want to admire the things that make that person different. We want to value the friction of a different perspective than our own. Um, in each other. So that has to happen both ways. You can't just have if you're the one person listening to this in your relationship and you're doing the things I say that I'm going to value, but if no one's valuing you, you deserve to be valued for what you bring, what makes you different, and you should be celebrated for that as well from the person you're in a relationship, whether it's your friends or your spouse or partner. Um, and that is really the first step in uh, if you have a continuous stream of going to work with and being and occupying workplace and personal space with people, um, that if you have these shared spaces. So have your own thing. I would also, one thing is to always move into the what's called the experimenting stage in KNAP's model with your spouse or partner, which is usually the space of low risk where you're self-disclosing things that are not so risky, but they're a way we learn about each other. You do this with icebreakers in your team meetings, and I make you introduce yourself again and again. I know this has caused some friction over the time, but what I'm doing, well, there's a lot of reasons why I do that, but it is an indicator that when you move back to the beginning of a conversation and then enter it in, you're actually allowing for more depth and more risk taking later if you remember those first layers of conversation, which are sometimes called small talk. You should sometimes have a little bit of small talk with your spouse or partner before entering into the deeper things, because it can, if you're listening carefully to that, you are actually opening up a more in-depth conversation later. If it stays in low risk and never gets to depth, you have a completely different problem. Give me a call. We got to talk. You have a different problem. And you're about ready to be blindsided. So I'm not talking about that. It's just like the word experimenting. You want to listen to be surprised by your partner. You want to listen to be curious. You want to be you want and you want to be listened to, but you want to actively listen. And if you don't agree, you're like, wow, I don't agree with how you are approaching this, how you're solving this problem. You want to look for that single thread you can pull out that of common ground or something you do agree in, because even if you can just find the thinnest thread of agreement, that can be a bridge to build a stronger connection with. So always look for where you can lean in a little, even if you don't agree. And you don't ever have to agree. That's the other thing is you shouldn't, well, I don't know what's that. It made me remember to uh, difference of listening to hold space and support for your partner, even if you don't agree, and the difference when you are listening, when you are being talked to in a way like I need to convince you I'm right. Um, and you might really make that a communication rule like, hey, I'm not going to agree with you on this, but I really want to hear what happened and I want to hear with your perspective and what went down. Um, and release the persuasive piece of it and allow someone to just own their own piece of what they're sharing. More to say about that in the conflict management class. So those are the three questions from the think tank. All right, we got through it. I'm really looking forward to your next response in this dialogue. Bye-bye.